All right. Hey, Ruckus Makers. We are happy to have Jacqueline M. Baker on the show today. She's a speaker, author, leadership consultant, and advisor known for her unique approach to modern etiquette and leadership. As the author of The Unexpected Leader, Discovering the Leader Within You, and Leader by Mistake, Becoming a Leader One Mistake at a Time, she frequently speaks and writes on the leadership for all concept. Her inspiration and expertise comes from more than a decade as the founder and principal consultant for Scarlet, a consultancy that provides leadership training to Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, community organizations, and individuals across the globe. She also leverages her experience serving in a number of corporate board and community service roles. An avid dinner party hostess, Jacqueline creates space and opportunities to gather groups for compelling conversation, delicious cuisine, and untraditional ways for continued leadership development. She is also the host of the podcast Just Start From Ideas to Action. Welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to start with some mildewy letters, but I might come back to the bio because I have so many questions about what's in there too. But yeah, you found some mildewy letters, right? And they reminded you of greatness. What's the story there?
Oh my gosh. I so appreciate this question because this question is how you know someone has read your book, first of all, because it was a story that was in my book, the second book, The Unexpected Leader, Discovering the Leader Within You. Essentially what happened is my father passed away just about a year and a half ago. And my father and I had an interesting relationship. I'll say that to spare everybody from all the details, because we'll never get on to question 2 if I keep going. But my father also tended to have a reputation to be a hoarder of things that weren't his. Okay. And I have had a personal, private reputation of not really feeling like I was smart. Although I have a list of things I've accomplished and I am internally proud of them, I've never said, I'm a smart person, or I've never academically even reflected smartness, if I'm being honest with you. Like, I didn't have the greatest GPA. And so when my father passed away and his wife called and said, hey, I have an envelope for you it's some things that I think you would like to see. I collected the envelope and I brought it with me. And as I'm driving back to my cousin's house where I was staying at the time, I was like, what is this stench? Like, what is this smell? And as I got to my cousin's house, I opened it up and realized that it was the collection of all the certificates that I had gotten from maybe kindergarten, of, perfect attendance and scholar of the week, and just all these certificates that clearly reflected that I did have some academic abilities and were smart, right, and accomplished. And I just did not I never felt that way. I was, comparing and thinking that smartness or, being academically astute meant a certain thing. And number one, it was alarming because I didn't realize my father had collected up these things. The reason why they smelled mildewy is because we had a house fire as when I was a child. And so clearly there was some water damage, but he had been holding on to these things. And I was very grateful to get it, number one, just to have them. But then 2 is a reminder. Sometimes you need things that you've been doing or reflections of who you are. You need to be proven those things. And so those certificates were just an unexpected surprise that have helped me to see more about who I am in ways that I didn't expect or I didn't anticipate. And my heart is on fire that you know that story and ask that question.
Great. Yeah. And I guess maybe in some respects it was like a personal highlight reel, right? So if you needed those reminders, here they were in letter form. And that was pretty cool that your dad had kept them.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because sometimes we don't see ourselves as leaders, even if we have the title or whatever. And you've encouraged others to see themselves as leaders, right? But you've struggled with it, as you mentioned, even in this first story. So talk to us about that struggle, and maybe other than getting this great collection of letters, like how do you get over that struggle?
Yeah, I would recommend that on your journey of considering where you are in the leadership realm, on your leadership levels, is to know what the levels are. And within our world at Scarlet, we really think about leadership in 4 different realms or 4 different levels. There's self-leadership, there's the leadership of others, there's the leadership of communities, which might include your workplace, and there's a leadership of movements, which can be things like the PTA Association, National Breastfeeding Mothers of America, these movements, right, that transcend organizations and individuals. And often we forget that there is an important level at the surface that is the most important one, and it's the leadership of self. So many
Mhm.
times we're waiting on someone to come and tap us on the shoulder, or you're waiting for a certain dollar amount to pop into your bank account, or, all the sometimes extra things that come along when we have the opportunity to say today without, without permission and without a particular role, position, status, or title that I am a self leader. And the reason why that's so important is because once you start to give yourself permission to see yourself as a leader, you start to give yourself permission to do a whole bunch of other things. And so before you wait on your boss or your partner or your friends to deem you as a leader, really the first step and the most accessible step is that you start to see yourself as one. And within the book, I talk about lots of different leadership characteristics that many of us already have within ourselves or that we practice on a personal level. And many of you are responsible for organizing your annual family reunion. You're responsible for your
Mhm.
girls' trip each and every year. You're responsible for pushing back when your child's being not, taken seriously or taken advantage of. And these are all leadership qualities. And so I would impart upon your listeners and your physical, visual viewers to remember that number one, you have the opportunity to see yourself as a self leader. And 2, to just look around and see what are the daily things that you're engaging in and the leadership qualities that you already have within you that maybe you can now give yourself permission to take into the workplace because you've been leaving them at the front door, right?
Mm.
One of the most tangible examples that I can think of is delegation, right? So many people
Okay.
at work say, I'm not a good delegator, I hoard all the work. When at home, you're delegating out all day long, right? So that you do the dishes, you do the blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it might be a little bit different in your home or a lot of bit different in your home, right? Because perhaps you have the position of power as the parent or the adult, but it truly is the act of deciding what are the tasks that we can divvy out, the ones that I don't necessarily have to be responsible for, and how can I delegate those out to my children or to the people in my workplace. The mindset at work isn't too much different. Like what are the rubber balls, right? Not the glass balls that I can divvy out
Mhm.
to other people to help them grow on their journey. And so that's how I would encourage your listeners to think about that.
Yeah, and that's a great concrete example. And I think people struggle. A ruckus maker might struggle thinking that there's a lot more glass balls than rubber balls. But in
Mhm.
my experience, really upon closer investigation, oh, what looked like glass was actually rubber. And there's
Yeah,
not actually that many glass balls. And ooh, now that I have this insight, how does that change my relationship to work and leadership and all
yeah.
of it? So
Mhm.
that was great. I could really relate to what you're saying too, is that self-leadership
Mhm.
portion. I don't know if you can see that behind me. I'll take it
And
off the wall. But for those that are watching on the video, this is the number one foundation of BLBS. When you get better, everybody wins,
mhm.
which is what you're talking about. It's self-leadership, but it's not selfish because when you are elevating your skill set in everything like everybody else, JFK said, right? Rising tide lifts all boats. It's the same concept. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
thanks for highlighting it. It's such a powerful concept. And yet, we are our worst critics
Mhm.
at times. I beat myself up way worse than anybody ever could.
Do you, Danny?
Uh,
Do you?
yeah, I do. A friend of mine, Ruth, I don't know, Ruth, if you're watching or listening, but we recently had an event in Miami. I was doing some work with her, and she was coaching me through something. So
Mhm.
you need to be kinder to yourself. And I was like,
Mm,
whew. I almost started crying, to be honest.
yeah,
So I do need to be nicer and kinder, gentler to myself. I don't know if you could relate. Maybe one of the
yeah,
ruckus makers watching or listening. What do we do? Do you have any advice around dealing with that negative inner critic?
I do. I so resonate with you on this because I just finished teaching a speaking in public, presenting class just a short while ago. And the class went great. And I felt really good about it. And the good thing about this class is that you get immediate feedback. We encourage surveys like immediately, which is great. You can go check it. But then I taught a class 2 weeks ago that didn't go as great. It wasn't horrible, but feedback or critical feedback sometimes just stings. It just is. And I remember after that session, like literally beating myself up about it and sort of kind of in the pits for a couple days until I
Mm,
shook myself out of it, right? And realized that feedback is a good thing. Feedback is really, really good in order to see where you stand and where you have the opportunity to grow. And I had to, for a moment, remember the advice that I give out. I say to people all the time, although I've been speaking and presenting for decades now, I am not safe from self doubt and imposter syndrome and anxiety,
mm.
right? And just like I teach people how to be stronger leaders, that doesn't mean that I'm exempt from sometimes beating myself up, just like you are as well. What I had to do was number one is remember my default. I don't know if you connect with this, Danny, or if any of your listeners connect with them, but I definitely am someone who identifies as a catastrophizer, right? I am
What's
someone
that
who
mean?
you expect the worst in
To
like
happen?
thought. Yeah, I am.
Ooh,
Which
yeah.
most people would never assume this about me, ever. Like
No, I don't
I
get that
like
energy from you at all.
I know. But let me tell you why that
Yeah.
is, right? Because
Okay.
so many times the reason why you are the way you are is like deep rooted, like it's something that
Mhm.
happened. For me, I had a lot of disappointment as a child, particularly from my parents,
Mm,
quite honestly. And there was a lot of things that were promised that did not come to fruition. And so I developed this muscle of expecting the worst. Like I expected disappointment because when I was disappointed, it didn't sting as bad as a kid. Oh,
right.
you're coming to get me. Oh, we're going to do X. You're going to buy such and such. Okay. But I don't expect it. And so when it didn't happen, okay, like my feelings aren't as hurt. The problem
Mm,
is that muscle that served me well has followed me into adulthood and I don't need it anymore. But I got so good at
mm,
it that now it's my default. And so the first thing I would encourage people to do, especially if you are on this journey of trying to be kinder to yourself as a growing leader, is to recognize your default. Because for me, although I know I am still a catastrophizer, and to be honest with you, Danny, I haven't quite shaken myself out of it. And I don't know if I ever
mhm,
will because I got so good at it. What I have done is I've cut the response time or I've cut the reaction time. So previously I could have been in the dumps about, any number of things for hours or days. Now I can shake myself out of it in seconds, right? Like if you call me out of the blue next week, Danny, I will, when I see the number pop up, I'll think, oh my gosh, like Danny must have feedback and the podcast went wrong. Like that's the first thought, to be honest with
right.
you.
Yeah. Catastrophizing.
Yes, but after 4 seconds, I'm like, "Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense." Whereas a year ago or several years ago, I would have been in it like for a long time and maybe not even answered the phone
Mm,
and called him back, called you back. So all that to say is for us to all be honest about our defaults. Some of us have polarized thinking, some of us filter, some of us just have all these defaults that cause us to respond in ways that might connect to other places in our life and to give yourself permission to accept like okay that's my default right now, maybe it'll change, but then give yourself permission to shake yourself out of it. And I do that and I recommend you do that by asking yourself questions like wait a minute, what's the worst thing can happen there here? Is this a realistic thought? Right? Is this a
mhm.
hassle or a horror? Like what advice would I give to a friend? That's a really powerful one because most times you
Yeah.
give your friends really good advice that you don't give
Mhm.
yourself. And
Mm-mm.
so I will say that on that journey of trying to not be so critical and not beat yourself up is to number one recognize by default like how are you, and you may discover this through personality assessments or just being a self-reflector, and then ask yourself really logical questions to shake yourself out of it and give yourself permission to grow to be who you truly want to be.
Hmm. That's so good. Especially, I mean, it's really having a lot of self-knowledge, right? And
Mhm.
being aware of what
Yeah.
goes on within you, noting that, right? Identifying it and then questioning, investigating, just like the glass and the rubber ball. Okay, is this
Mhm.
serving me? What kind of changes do I want to make? And I love that idea of coaching yourself.
Mhm.
I invest a lot of money in coaching, okay? And I'm proud of that. And through coaching, it's helped me again that everyone wins, right? It's elevated what I've been able to
Yeah.
do and accomplish things that I never thought was possible.
Yeah.
Uh, but
I'm
I've
curious though, Danny, are you always have you were you an early adopter of coaching or did it take you a while?
uh I I woke up in a moment where at a conference, the head facilitator, like this idea, everyone win, when you get better, everyone wins. Uh, that was basically said in a similar fashion. which was everyone wins when a leader gets better.
Mhm.
That was said from a stage at a leadership conference I was at, Jacqueline.
Mm,
And that moment I heard it, I thought, what a responsibility. Like,
mm,
it's so true. And I looked at my calendar, it was a mirror moment. Where else am I really working and investing in my growth? And the honesty, the honest answers, there wasn't a lot to
mm,
show on the calendar.
mhm,
Not only that, I could throw a big pity party for the world's most underutilized, school administrator.
mhm,
Or in that moment, I decided to launch this podcast, talk to the Jacquelines of the world, learn from your stories of success and failure, and most importantly, take action on one idea. And I
mhm,
knew my skill set would grow. So I had to hear that.
mm.
And the first coaching I received was around podcasting. And at that moment, I had never spent, it was $1,200, right? $100 per month.
Whoa.
And it felt like billions at
Yes,
the time.
yes.
Now I look back and that looks like a penny because I've invested so much in coaching. So that's my answer. But the other connection, I promise I want to turn the mic back to you.
That's fine.
The other connection I had is I've thought to myself, well, what if I stopped like working with all the coaches? I'm not going to, but I never, I'm so effective coaching the ruckus makers, right?
Mhm.
But rarely do I give that,
Yeah,
sit and give that advice to myself. Uh, yeah. So, anyways, just
yeah.
ruminating on it.
I
So,
I I I asked I asked you that question
yeah,
for, I wouldn't say selfish reasons, but because to be honest with you, out the gate, I wasn't a believer in coaching, but
yeah,
mainly because we came uh, from humble beginnings, and I had a
hmm,
hard time understanding before I understood coaching, understanding how we would pay someone so much money for what I thought was advice, right? Which
yeah,
that it's different. And I, went through my journey of understanding a bit more, but I wasn't a believer in the beginning. But whew, am I a believer now in so many ways?
yeah. I had stories around money, and we grew up, and
Hmm.
there was a certainly challenging times, and so that I think I know it influenced me greatly. But once I got over that hump, and I saw the speed and the acceleration and what I could accomplish, then I was all in for
Mm,
sure, for
nice,
sure.
nice.
All right. Well, let me ask you one more question before the break here. But what I want to ask is, how do weddings, or how have weddings taught you about order and protocol?
Mm. Oh, you've been digging in my bio and in my books, Daddy. So, my first entrepreneurial venture was as a wedding and event producer in my early 20s. And literally, how we started that business is I was working at Wayne State University as
Hmm.
a pseudo event planner, which is where I got my undergrad and graduate degree. And one day, me and my good friend Zemin, we were disgruntled about our jobs. I don't know why. And we decided we were going to go start our own wedding and event production company like the next day, right? And we
Yeah,
did. We went down to the city county building and started this company and just figured everything out. And so we took definitely the taskier, harder route versus going to some accelerator that taught you about event management. We literally like learned trial by fire, which is
sure.
fine.
Yeah,
But what I will say, I think independent of if we would have went a packaged route or the way that we went self-taught, I learned a couple of key things. Number one is, while I didn't fall in love with wedding and event production long term, I fell in love with order and protocol, as you just said, which is what eventually led me to launch Scarlet, which is now a leadership consultancy. But Scarlet
mhm,
first started out as an etiquette company, specifically targeting teen girls. We've grown to be a leadership consultancy over time. But there are two lessons that I want to pull out of that question and out of my answer. And one is, it's amazing when you give yourself permission to start things, start a business, or start your learning journey, the lessons that you get from it that you never anticipated, the
oh
unexpected
yeah,
things. I learned how to be a relationship maker. I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to have hard conversations from my experiences with mothers of the bride. And it is
mm,
because usually mothers of the bride in wedding situations were the toughest, especially if they were paying,
oof, yeah,
especially if they were paying. They had a lot
hmm,
of answered to me
A lot of feedback.
a lot of feedback. When most times it was the bride that hired me, right? And so I don't know where the money came from, and that doesn't matter, right? I'm loyal to whoever the contract is with. But I learned quickly that it's important for you to, keep your head on a swivel and pay attention to all the players in the room and understand sometimes you got to have tough conversations. You need to understand how to negotiate. So I learned a lot of those key skills during my wedding and event production days. But I'll also say that, on that journey of give myself permission to start things, and even all of your listeners and your ruckus makers giving themselves permission to be ruckus makers, while you might have an intention in one area, to be flexible and fluid enough to have your eyes open for other areas. And I say that because although Scarlet truly did start as an etiquette company that was targeting teen girls to make sure that teen girls were confident, all the things that come along with etiquette training, about 6 to 7 months into doing this work, Danny, the Detroit Lions called sort of randomly and asked if we could teach etiquette to their rookie players. And that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute, like there is a bigger audience for this.
Yeah.
So that kicked off me realizing that there was an opportunity for me to teach etiquette and then what would become leadership skills to Fortune 500 and 100 companies all across the country and beyond. And that's an important lesson on everyone's leadership journey, right? In making sure that, you are being flexible, you're being fluid, and you're not, so stuck in, well, I was hired only for this, or I went to school specifically for this, and never being flexible enough to look around, because a lot of the spaces that I'm in right now have nothing to do with what I formerly went to school for or what I thought I would be doing. But boy, don't I enjoy these spaces. So that's truly how we navigated, or how I navigated from wedding and event production to fully the world of etiquette, to now operating a leadership consultancy that also teaches etiquette as a part of what we do. So that's
amazing.
The story.
That's an awesome story.
Thank you.
It's a good place to hit pause. We're going to get some messages in from our sponsors. When we get back, though, Jacqueline, I'd love to talk about your most recent book, The Unexpected Leader.
Sure.
Learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. Get online PD that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading schools, strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. Apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. Today's show is also proudly sponsored by Organized Binder, which is a program giving students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder's color-coded systems implemented by the teacher through parallel process with students, helping them create a predictable and dependable classroom routine. You can learn more and improve your students' executive functioning at organizedbinder.com. And lastly, our show is sponsored by TeachFX. This is a really cool partnership and a great app. I love them for two specific reasons, although there's many more reasons why I love them. One, as a school leader, TeachFX helps you scale your ability to deliver effective feedback by being in all classrooms all the time, not for evaluation, but for growth. And the other thing that makes TeachFX super cool is it helps you celebrate those moments of brilliance in the classroom and engineer so that you can have those happen even more. TeachFX also has a really special offer, which is a pilot program just for ruckus makers, which means you can try out TeachFX without spending anything. So go over to teachfx.com/BLBS to check that out, ruckus maker. So we are back with Jacqueline Baker, and what an awesome first half of the conversation. Now I want to turn our focus to your most recent book called The Unexpected Leader, Discovering the Leader Within You. And so, yeah, that's an interesting title, Jacqueline. What's this book all about?
This book is about discovering the leader within you. I think the tagline did a good job on this particular book. But stemming from, the story attached to the question that you asked earlier about the mildewed certificates, attached to many other stories that exist in the book, I really didn't spend a significant amount of my life feeling like a leader or seeing myself as a leader. And I have had a lot of conversations with a lot of people throughout the various stops in my career. And many other people have felt that same way. And when you feel that way, when you feel like you're not a leader, it stops you from
Hmm.
seeing opportunities. It stops you from believing that you're capable of certain things. It stops you from believing you can use your voice. It stops you from launching that $1 million idea that's going to change the way you and your family and your community lives. And so I went on this mission after my first book, which is called Leader by Mistake, Becoming a Leader One Mistake at a Time, of developing tools and resources and really developing transparent stories, or really
Hmm.
recalling transparent stories to help other people see themselves as a leader as well. That book, or this book, has just been a wonderful journey to not only launch the book, but to also, of course, still be in launch mode because the book is probably just about 6 or 7 months old at this point. But what I've heard so far is so many people use it as a reference tool. They use it as an opportunity to identify the skills that are deep within them, even personally. And now they can give themselves permission to take those skills to the workplace or into other places that they deem places that they want to count in, and the places that they want to show up well. And so truly the book is all about discovering the unexpected leader within you and elevating to your next level, whatever that level is for you.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's what drives me these days because I
Mhm.
know people would be impressed with some of the things I've already accomplished. But speaking of coaching, I had a coaching call today, so shout out to Jale
Mhm.
because she's amazing, and she helped me see that for me, it's about like the next challenge that really inspires me, and so that's what I'm hearing
Yeah.
you talk about when it's
Mhm.
like that unexpected thing that's within you. So
Yeah.
back to your work, Jacqueline. What's the leadership wheel and how does it work?
Oh, the leadership wheel. So the leadership wheel is a tool that helps you to find out what your default leadership style is. This is an
Mm,
important tool because for so many people, they go into compare mode, right? Oh, if I
yeah.
don't do it like Danny, then I'm not a leader. If I don't do it like Mandela or Beyonce or Oprah, right, then I'm not a
Hmm.
leader. And the truth is, you'll never do it like Mandela. You'll never do it like Danny because you're not Danny. Like there is
Mm,
one Danny out of all the 8 billion people that exist in the world. And so,
mm,
what the leadership will allows you to do is outline your values, really evaluate your relationship with feedback, outline just how you approach different things so that you can come to a conclusion on, okay, of the 9 leadership styles that I lay out in the book, everything from autocratic to servant leadership, transformational, etc., for you to say, okay, this is the style that I probably am by default, right?
mm, mhm,
But to also not give people permission to stop there. Because while Danny, you and I and everyone we know usually gravitates towards one leadership style that is default and feels good to them, that's not going to work, right? Because every situation is different. So it's about recognizing what my default is, just like the catastrophizer conversation we had
right.
earlier, but then embracing situational leadership and knowing that how I handled that situation last week, how I handle the situation next week, how I handle the situation in 5 years it's gonna be necessary for me to pause and evaluate. Okay, what's this situation? What are the skills I have? Who are the people around me? And what leadership style do I need to adopt in this scenario? And so the
Mhm,
leadership will allows you to assess where you're at, but it helps you to ultimately get to the point of saying, okay, my default is this, but from a situational leadership standpoint, I need to be flexible to embrace any number of them at any time, which I know for some people is challenging. Some people never want to see themselves as an autocratic leader. You're like, I don't want to be a
yeah,
dictator. But think about it, Danny. You and I both know this. When crisis is going on, we want a definitive leader. Like I want somebody telling me, yes, Jacqueline, put your mask on. Jacqueline, do like
mhm,
you want people that
mhm.
give you like definitive guidance, which could be seen sometimes as autocratic. So the leadership wheel is yet another tool that's in the book to help people to identify their leadership style and empower them to embrace situational leadership.
Makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like you have a natural leadership style, but depending on the context,
Mhm.
can there be some fluidity within you, some awareness,
Yeah.
knowing what would serve people best? So, we highly recommend every ruckus maker check out Jacqueline's book, The Unexpected Leader. And yeah, if you pick up a copy, let me know what you think too. Let Jacqueline know what you think.
Yes.
Um, Before I get to my last questions for every guest, I just wanted to ask you really quick about your life thesis document, and if you
Mm.
could share a little bit about that.
Yes. Danny, I got to ask you, do you feel like you have a busy mind? Like, is your mind busy? Are you a little idea factory or not so much?
Uh, I am the idea factory. Okay.
Okay, all right. The ideas start and stop at Danny, right?
Yeah, that starts out with me, but I'll just say like I would love if there was somehow a challenge or competition to see who can come up with the most ideas. I'll go toe to toe with anybody for sure. I am
I
that confident.
listen, we need to start an idea factory club because
Okay.
I too am a little idea factory, right?
Sweet. I knew it. I knew it. Yeah.
And I appreciate that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I help people start the things they want to do. I help them to be better leaders. Like it's important that I do have ideas to help push them along. But that little idea factory that I have will get me in trouble because you can't
Mm,
go execute every idea that comes to mind, which is why
mm-mm.
I have some systems in place. I use, task management software for me to just dump my ideas in and come back to them at a later date. I own
Yeah.
more domain names than what I'm proud of, but it's
Hey, now we're talking.
right. But my having a life thesis, right? It helps me to focus. It helps me to say to myself, yes, Jacqueline, you have this new idea. You want to launch this thing. You think it's such a great idea on the inside, but Jacqueline, does this ladder up to your life thesis? And it keeps me focused. All right.
Mm,
At the
mm,
end of the day, Danny, when it's all said and done, I want nothing more than for people to say about me that I help them start the things that they want to do and elevate to their next level of leadership. And
yes.
everything that I do, every podcast I decide to take or not take, every client I decide to say yes to or no to, is they all go through that
Through that
question.
filter.
They go
Hmm.
through that filter, and they have to, because if not, Jacqueline would be out here doing everything, right? Because
Mm,
it's a good idea. And so
mm.
I encourage all of your listeners, independent of if you are a little idea factory like Danny and I or not, to take yourself through the process of developing your own life thesis, right? To come up with a statement that you can quickly run things through before you go trying to sign up to start this job, start this project, do these things that at the end you're like, I really don't, this isn't really what I wanted to do. I just did it because my ego said so, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so I appreciate you asking that question because I think that this tool, honestly, is one of the most important tools in the book, because it helps you to narrow down and focus on what's truly important to you.
Yeah, that's so good. So for me, I have a life principle, which is
Mhm.
to be an intentional catalyst.
Mm,
I know in every space that I share with other people, I'm accelerating change for better or for worse. So it's a
mm,
reminder, self-awareness, how I should operate. But my ruckus maker rules for myself. If it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. So like,
mm,
do things that give me energy, honor my relationships in fitness or health every day. So it doesn't mean I have to do some Olympic level, but just like moving around and calling friends, that kind of thing. And then the last one, only work with leaders who have a bias for action, because
mm.
otherwise we're all wasting too much time,
We're
and
just
I don't got
talking,
time for that. Yeah,
right?
just talking. So, all right, I could talk to you for the next 3 hours, but I
Oh,
promise. I know I'm being real. I wouldn't say that.
same. I wouldn't touch my heart like that
Yeah.
if I wouldn't. I wasn't being real.
Thank you. That's really like I received that. So let's wrap up with the last three questions that I ask all the guests. So Jacqueline, if you could put one message on all school marquees around the world for just a single day, what would your message be?
Just start. That's it. Just take action and just start. I believe that so many of our questions get answered in the action.
Mm,
And while I know there is not a whole bunch of subtext behind just start, I do believe that once you start to give yourself permission to start anything, right? Start a
yeah,
sport, start tutoring, start whatever it is, your questions get answered in the action. And so it is all day, just start.
that's right. Now, if you were building your dream school, there were no constraints in terms of resources. Your only limitation was your ability to imagine. How would you build that dream school, Jacqueline? What would be your three guiding principles?
Ooh. Three guiding principles. One is give yourself permission to explore unknown things. So
Mm,
explore the unknown. Two, embrace and experience failure. Three is to enjoy the process. enjoy your process, whatever the process is that you're in. And I love number one. I love number one and number two, but I'll say number three is so important
Hmm.
because you and I were talking earlier. I think before we even went live, we were talking about rushing from thing to thing. And I was even telling you my experience with my book, The Unexpected Leader, that sometimes I feel like I should be sprinting, but it's really a marathon.
Mm.
And to just sit back and enjoy your experience, whatever it is. Because if you don't do that, you're really just mindlessly and aimlessly wandering from thing to thing without, living in it, right? Without living in whatever it is. And so I think just giving students or giving people the tools, the resources, and the space to just enjoy an experience versus rushing from thing to thing. I think if that's taught early, that could really change things in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We talked about a lot today, a lot of great
we
stuff. Of
did.
everything we discussed, Jacqueline, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
You have value and you have the opportunity to change your world. And I say that because sometimes, many times, we believe that if we're not changing everybody's world, then we're not doing anything. If we're not on the front page of whatever, if we don't have a gazillion followers, really just give yourself the opportunity or give yourself permission to be impactful and to change your world for the better, even if it's three people around you. And so that's what I would encourage ruckus makers to take with them. And of course, to just start.